All right. So I want to give you guys a quick little summary, visual rundown of the Bohr effect. So the Bohr effect, in a nutshell, is CO2 levels, CO2 concentration levels, having an effect on oxygen binding to hemoglobin. So here in this diagram here, we've got oxygen coming in through the lungs, binding to hemoglobin, getting taken to the tissues, and that oxygen leaving hemoglobin and getting into the tissues where it's used for cellular respiration, generating energy, that kind of thing. In cellular respiration, if you remember, you're producing CO2. Okay, so when you get rid of the CO2 enters the blood, forms carbonic acid in the blood. So the more CO2 you have, the more acidic your blood is. Okay, slightly. This is all within range. Um, not a problem for this acidity. It's a natural thing. You come to the lungs, and this CO2 gets gassed off through the lungs, diffuses into the alveoli, and leaves the body. Okay, so this is the basic idea of how it works. And these different concentrations of CO2 have a really important effect up here on the hemoglobin. So over here at the lung blood barrier, okay, so oxygen's coming in because you have high concentrations of oxygen out here compared to the oxygen in the blood. So it's going to come in and bind to hemoglobin. What we find is the lower levels of CO2, the better you get oxygen binding to hemoglobin. Low CO2 means hemoglobin is more sticky for oxygen, okay? Which is a really good thing because right where the lungs, the air in the lungs meet the blood, you have really low CO2 because the CO2 is leaving here, okay? So you get oxygen sticking the hemoglobin, it goes to the tissues. And over here, it would be a bad thing if hemoglobin was really sticky to oxygen because we need it to disembark, leave the hemoglobin, diffuse into tissues so it can be used. And that's exactly what we have because these tissues are producing CO2. Okay, so you have higher levels of CO2 over here, which makes this oxygen better able to leave the hemoglobin and get into tissues. So what we get is right where we want it, more binding of hemoglobin to oxygen, right where we want it, less binding of hemoglobin to oxygen. Um, and this is responsive to activity levels and what's going on in your environment because if you are exerting more, you need more oxygen. Well, guess what? If you're exerting more, you're producing more CO2 in tissues. This concentration goes up and you get more oxygen released into tissues. So it's a really cool effect, really ingenious way that your body regulates and moves oxygen around using the Bohr effect.